Folks, we are back with another episode of DramaQuest. It's been a long time, but we're here and we have something exciting to share. Earlier this year, we talked about a new TACP TLP coming up, but that's not the end of it. We have more new servers on the horizon, and this one is not too far on the horizon at all. So today, I am joined by the team from the Dalia server. I think I'm saying that right. If you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves.
We can start with I'm Cole. Um, been a developer on the server for about 5 years. I started a long time ago, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. Took a long break, came back, played some more. Eventually became a developer, wrote scripts, um, got into a lot of the back end core stuff. Really just enjoyed, the logic and the problems, supporting developers, fixing problems for players. Just became a passion of mine, something that I can do to just, you come home at the end of the day and it just kind of seems fulfilling. And I don't know, the path led me here. So just kind of seeing where it takes me.
Okay. Jeff, what about you?
So my name's Jeff. I've been playing in the community since about 2008. I've been a developer now for the last 4-ish years, 5 years. I predominantly work in system balance and web stuff. So I work on our web tools and our website or web presence and whatnot. Um, a lot of the high-end players know me. I've played in a ton of the guilds here. I've been here a long time. That's probably about all there is about me.
All right. And last but not least, Fuwak.
So I'm Fuak. I've played on this server since 2005. I was a live player on Burtox since launch. I have been developing here for probably 10 years. I am in charge of the fun department, and so it's mostly about player experience and content for me.
Okay. Now, to give people a little bit of a background, when we say the Dalia server, people who have been around the scene for a long time will recognize that name a little bit, right, as Shards of Dalia, which is one of the oldest EverQuest emulator servers around, right?
That is correct.
So how are you guys connected to the Shards of Dalia server?
Well, for me and my brother grew up playing EverQuest many years ago when I was 14. I think I played, and then Kunar came out, and then never played beyond that. My brother was in love with the game. He's got posters on the walls, like the scrolls of the different launches. But at one point in time, he introduced me to Shards of Dalaya. I said, "Oh, this is a cool EverQuest game that came out," and we played a little bit. But then me and my brother, other younger brother, I played a boxed Shadow Knight and Cleric, and he played a Bard and Wizard, and we kind of min-maxed our group. And I kind of fell in love with the playing two classes at the same time because I was kind of unique at the time, the two box limit. So you kind of, the way my mind works, you have to kind of, it's almost like dual classing, and you really got to kind of balance each class. I think it's a really unique play style. I ended up doing it at different servers that became free to play where I would want to play two classes at the same time. And we played that for a while until I was like level 57. And then we took a break. And for some reason, I rejoined again 5 years after that point. A lot of change. That's kind of like the beginning of how I started playing on being connected to the server.
Well, I guess what I'm really trying to get at here is how is the new server connected to the previous server?
I see.
It's sort of like a spiritual successor, right? But it's not
it's
a
a very
direct
good question.
sequel or remake, right?
It's
It
a
is the old
spiritual
server,
successor.
yeah.
It's almost like a ROM hack version of the old server.
So it's like a emulated version of the emulated server.
Exactly. We took what we liked and we rebuilt most of the systems because there were flaws in them or issues that we wanted to fix. We're trying to streamline advancement, fun, class balance, a lot of issues that we couldn't deal with on the old server because it became impossible to maintain.
Okay, now just to clarify for the listeners here, when people think of emulator servers, they're probably thinking of things like TACP, Project Warm, and P99, which are like the big three in the emulator scene. And all three of those servers attempt to do within their own way an approximation of EQ in a certain period of time. But you guys are totally different, right? Your server almost uses EverQuest as like a playground to make a totally new game that is just in the EverQuest engine, so to speak. Is that how you would like look at it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, the best way I would explain it is it rhymes with EverQuest in the sense that like we're trying to hit all the same vibes. We're trying to give you the same feel. You know, we still want you to like, we still want the classes to be rooted in what the classes were in EverQuest, right? We don't want, you know, we don't want to, you know, make them feel completely foreign. But for the most part, like we are our own content. A lot of this because when the server was older, like forever ago, there was a whole bunch of private servers that got shut down in the past for essentially just being, you know, a 1-to-1 EQ clone early on, 2005, 2006. SOD, the original server basically avoided that by not doing that. That's how they sort of managed to stay alive, was by purposefully making their own stuff. So, because that is where we came from, we're just sort of continuing that trend.
So if I'm a brand new player who has never heard of it before, tell me about the Dalia server. What is in it for me?
So we have a ton of content. We have 20 years of content. We've got a ton of low level content. There's a lot of stuff to like get you acclimated to the server, help you get started, get some gear. We've got an in-depth system of what are essentially low-level raid monsters called adepts, which are basically aimed at providing like, a raiding experience for new players that's, smaller scale, easier to get into.
Is there a reason to tackle low level raid content rather than just kind of like rushing to maximum level beyond, like you should enjoy the experience, of course?
So there's some stuff going on there. There's some, like, how do I say this? There's some things you can get from there that aren't irreplaceable, but they will last a long time. So some of the gear you can get will last quite a while. Now it's if you're really trying to go super try hard, it's probably not worth your time in most cases unless you want some very specific things, but they're not necessarily power things. There's some illusions that people like that are only available through there. There's some, special clickies that will last a while. But like if you're really trying to try hard, it's probably not the best use of your time. But there's actually usually a pretty vibrant community of people who just sort of like doing that stuff. So we generally have a bunch of people who basically exist like on the server just to kill that content because it gives you like a different progression system, and basically makes a game within a game sort of thing. And a lot of people tend to like that.
Okay. Could I come back at like max level and just do the low level raid mobs?
They are level locked, so you cannot. They're basically they have a set level that they exist at. So if you want to kill them, you got to be the right level. Now you can level
It's
lock.
sort of a bonus opportunity as you level up. If you encounter one of these monsters and you want to kill it with your friends, you get superior loot for the level that you're at, but no high level players can farm it away from you because they're locked out.
What number of players are these designed to take?
6 to 12 for the most part. Most the lowest level ones can usually be done with less than that. Even you can do a lot of them with 3 to 4 characters. And we are a 2-box server, so a lot of times, if it's just you and a friend, you could kill a bunch of the lower level ones. You get another person or two, and you can kill most of them between level 1 and, let's say, 30.
When you see them, do you know immediately? Is there some visual indicator that this is a mob that is set apart?
Yeah, so they have a tag that just says underneath them, like, this is their name, and it'll say adept underneath them. Like, they won't aggro you, so like you have to walk up and attack them, but they're very obviously flagged that that's what this is.
I
Okay.
created about half of these creatures.
Okay.
So we have an original subset of the adepts that were created probably 20 years ago by the originator of the server. And then I made a second set that were more focused on people who are experienced in the EverQuest raid game. So they require more group tactics than just the traditional try to tank and spank overwhelm that might have been the original ones.
So when you're building these, what is your vision? What are you going for?
Well, mostly I want to show low-level players a cool high-level fight. And so they get to experience the raid game the same way that a raiding guild might, without the commitment to being in a raiding guild. You could just literally walk up with 6 or 12 of your friends and take this fight. You don't have to be committed to the, as all the listeners know, the grueling schedule of being in a raiding guild.
Okay. And well, yeah, so you talked about the schedule. That's another point. What is the respawn, or is there some kind of lockout, or could I just like sit here and every couple hours hit the mobs?
They respawn based on their level, and so each mob's respawn is different, but I believe we were doing something like 1 hour per level. Jeff could correct me on that.
Yeah, it's a half hour per level. So the low level ones, like the level 4 ones, respawn in a couple hours. The high level ones respawn in 12, 15 hours. Depends, like as you said, it depends on the mob's level.
Okay, but if you're a completionist, you might want to get a few swings at it to get every item, right?
Oh yeah,
Oh, and people do that.
There's a
so
little,
one.
there's a little bit of a balance too there, because if you make them too common, then there's a ton of low-level quests and just so much content at the low end that we definitely existed in an era where adepts were, the loot from the adepts was so good that you could basically, that became the preferred way to level. And so the idea was that if you're going to spend X amount of time killing an adept, we might as well make the long quest rewards at the same level equal power. And basically, it comes down to you play the way you want to play. If you want to form an adept guild and farm every adept all the way through the levels, you can do that. If you want to if you enjoy the content, the quests, I mean, there's plenty of quests at every level, from level 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15. There's never a point where there's not quests, and there's like great rewards. You get gear that levels up, equivalent to the power of the adept gear. So there's a lot of thought going into balancing that new player experience.
Okay. And so we sort of got hung up on the adepts, and I think it is really cool. And of the things I've heard about the server personally so far, it's the thing that draws me in the most. But I don't. There's so many other questions I have, so I'm going to segue here. Since it's totally custom, I mean, I have like a million things I want to know. What's the level cap going to be on launch?
It's 65.
65. Okay. Will there be AAs?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Are they only level 51 plus, or are they sprinkled throughout the whole spectrum?
Whole spectrum, right?
No,
Wow.
they're 51. They're 51 plus.
Oh, yes.
They're 51 plus, but the level breakdown for 51 plus varies. Some of them require standard EQ stuff. Some require level 51. Some require 60. Whatever. You get a big bonus to them at 65. So if you're level 51, some people will stop and get like run A's or whatever. But for the most part, you're generally incentivized to get to 65 because you get a lot. Not only is your character stronger and you can kill more stuff, you get a big bonus to AA XP at level 65.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, starting zones. A lot of the emulators that I've played on that don't aim to emulate classic EverQuest basically pick one area, and that's like a starting zone for everybody, no matter what their race or class is. Do you guys do that, or do you have a bunch of like, hey, you're in Kelethin, you're in Kanos kind of stuff?
We have a ton of starting zones. Actually, different classes of different races start in different starting zones. Most races have their own different starting zones. Like we just added evil froglocks because the client natively has them listed, and people would come into the old server and say, "Why can't I play a froglock Shadow Knight or a froglock rogue?" So we went through the effort of making a specific zone for them. They've got their own starter zone. Basically, every man, how many starter zones do we even have? There's a list floating around that just got made. I think we have like 13 or 12 or something. So
There's quite a few. We keep making new ones, original geometry versions.
That's awesome. So you mentioned evil. Do factions play a role in the server?
So not in the traditional sense. That's just generally how people refer to them. But I mean, there is some good and evil stuff. But unlike standard EQ, like you're not going to go to a city and just get murdered or like BKOS, but generally, like if you're an evil race and you go up to a city, they're just not going to deal with you. They're not going to sell you stuff. You're not going to be able to interact with their vendors. You might not be able to use their bank. You can build that faction up by doing some quests for them, but like baseline, they're just kind of going to be like, yeah, we don't really like you.
Right. So the floor is a little bit higher than it is in a traditional EQ, but I think it's still cool that you have reason to interact with the faction system, to get those perks of using the resources of a location.
Well,
Exactly.
and while we do scatter the players around, there's a fast travel mechanic called the Mansion of Portals, where you can zone into this area and then it's filled with portals to destinations you may wish to go to. So the newbie players are easily able to reach each other, and then when they arrive in those cities, if they want to quest with the local NPCs, they'll become endeared to the city and they'll be able to bank there, do whatever.
Is that available right from the get-go?
Yes.
Okay. So with it going all the way up to 65, are you using assets all the way from Classic to Planes of Power, or are you even beyond that?
We have support for assets all the way up through, oh geez, everything in ROF2, and then for some stuff we actually have even above and beyond that.
And we've been creating custom assets on top of that. We've done so much art, so many original zones. We're using Blender, 3ds Max, etc., creating full-on 3D zones, new levels.
That's crazy. Wow. Um, when you make these levels, do you try to keep them in the spirit of original EQ, or do you just let your mind take you where it goes?
Oh, very much so. I try to design them even and make them buggy in the same way that the original zones were. Um, I'm an originalist. I think that Kunark is probably the end, maybe Velius, but by Luklin, I'm tired of what they did with EverQuest. I'd like to keep it as the classic.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be a daunting task with that mindset. You're like, okay, I'm going to make a new zone, and you're like, how do I make it? How do I make this zone as good as Guck? That's a tall order.
Oh yes, many of the original zones are very difficult. I did a zone called Sunken Cathedral where we were really trying to channel the sort of primitive ramp rooms of an early zone, and it was very enjoyable to do. And the players really enjoyed the product.
Do you guys retain any of the original EQ lore, or do you have your whole own lore system?
So the lore for the most part is ours. I mean, how do I say this? Like a lot of the stuff is still sort of rooted in the EverQuest stuff. So you've got a lot of like we use the original God models, sort of like the flavor there is similar. It's not one to one, but they've been renamed. They've had their own, their lore's been changed. It's still got the same vibe in a lot of ways, but it is all custom. I mean, essentially, when the server started, it was basically, someone's like, what if I turned my ideas for like a Dungeons and Dragons game into an EverQuest server? That's more or less how it started.
Right. Yeah. I mean, basically, like instead of making my own game from scratch, let me just make it in EverQuest. So then it's got that familiar EverQuest gameplay loop feel, but it's something all its own. So just to give me a player who hasn't played on the server ever before, to give me like a perspective on this, the model of Kazakh I'm sure you guys use that somewhere, right?
Yeah, it's used in a couple places.
What when I'm on Dalia and I see the thing that I'm used to associating with Kazakh, what am I looking at there?
Um, so, so the first thing I can think of, the first place you would see it would actually be in one of Fuwak's adept fights. There is a adept named, what is it? Durkuk the Abomination is probably the first place you'll see it, and then it's used as some a couple raid trash. I'm trying to think. It's used in several places. I honestly can't even think of them all right now.
Okay. So the Abomination, what level adept is that? If you could ballpark it for me.
I believe max engage is level 32.
Okay, so you said max engage. Is it anything lower? Could like a level 1 engage them?
Yeah, in theory, I mean you're probably going to get murdered, but yeah, you could walk up and hit it if you were feeling very daring.
Okay, so there's a ceiling, just not a floor. I like that. I like that. You could see what you're really made of if you want to.
Is
Yeah,
there a loot floor though, or no? Like requirement to loot the loot?
I think there
I maybe
is.
within 10 levels or something, but
Yeah,
that never comes up. Those fights, if you're out of level, probably going to kill you.
when Fuwak first put these out, we had a group that went through and killed them, and I would say for the most part, when we were killing them, we didn't really take characters more than let's say a level or two below, just because they weren't like, how do I say this? They weren't so hard where we had to like stack our raid and make sure our raid was perfect to kill them. but they were hard enough that we took a bunch. If you took a bunch of characters 4 or 5 levels lower, and took one healer, you were going to struggle.
Could I use them to like twink lower level characters that I brought and had, like, if I had my new cleric box, right? I'm replacing my old duo druid, and I want my level 10 cleric to sit there in the back and just loot the corpse when he dies. Could I do that?
I think he said that. I think there was a 10 level limit on doing that, so I don't think you could for that big, or excuse me, I don't think you could for that large of a gap.
Would it be like I could not loot it at all, or I could loot it but I couldn't wear it?
So if you can loot it, you could wear it. You wouldn't be able to loot it at all. So how our loot works is if you can loot something, we don't generally do required levels. We do recommended levels. So if you were to loot something, it'll just scale down, and then as you level up, your stats will get, will catch up to wherever it was. So if you
that makes sense.
And one other thing to note about adept loot is adept loot is all XPable. So it grows as you kill things. You fill it with experience, and it gets better.
I love that. I love that.
Generally, when you first get the items, they're going to be slightly better than, like, if you were to kill a level 32 adept and then you went and did a level 32 dungeon, you'd get the adept items would be slightly better than those dungeon items. But as long as you have them, they're going to keep getting better with you. So if you get in that situation of, oh, I'm going to have this item for 20 levels. 20 levels later, it's gotten 20 levels of experience in it. It's going to have grown, 30, 40% stronger probably.
Okay. Now, when you build these encounters, and not just the adepts, but really all your content, do you have lore behind them? Do you have a storyline? Like, do they drop items that represent aspects of their character?
I think generally it's preferred to, because if you don't do what you're saying, then it becomes like, it kind of devalues the content, right? So there's a lot of, so if I was making content, it would be, I'm going to add cold to this, cold flat damage, because that's kind of it really begins with kind of like the theme and the feel and the vibe and how you want players to feel as they're going through your zone. And I like to try to embody like the experience, and really the balance comes later. And I think if you do this, then it fits better into the world, rather than just kind of like, we're just going to throw this in here for just items.
We have a really big thematic focus when we generate these. The items are all in the theme of the zone or the area, and we try to work it into the rubric of everything else that's there. We try to keep it pretty immersive. I mean, it's sort of an amazing system. It's 20 years of built up stuff now in this area, and it all works together.
I like that. I think that is so important and is frequently overlooked. It's certainly overlooked a lot of times, even in regular EverQuest, right? Like, not every zone or every mob got the same level of attention to detail, you might say. But I always come back to items like carnal pauldrons, right? The item itself is not remarkable. The stats aren't remarkable, but there's a message there, right? Because it's the kobold priest who's dropping the carnal pauldrons, and I think it's giving us a little insight into that NPC, and maybe those kobolds in general, right? Like, the kobolds in Soul Sec B have turned to worship Nagafin. They've abandoned their traditional gods, and now their priest has carnal pauldrons. Carnal pauldrons aren't something you'd really associate with most priesthoods traditionally. So that's like, I look for things like that in EQ, and I am excited to hear that that is going on behind the scenes in the thought process of your content.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure at every point in the game you would experience that feeling with every zone. Like that, I think that's really the draw to the custom content, is that some developer who was passionate about EverQuest and this game spent hours investing time and really bringing their ideas into this game. And we do a lot to try to preserve that, like their original creativity, and kind of like do it honor. Like when we're balancing, we try to maintain, because I think it's special that the amount of time that they invested in kind of, I think players and
I think we're
We might
losing
have
you,
cut
Cole.
out, but we had a lot of writers that really wanted to look good, and they had their pet projects that they've been working on forever. And we try to keep all that intact. even if you have to adjust balance.
So when you're working on stuff that has existed for so long, and you're trying to maintain the spirit of the Shards of Dalia server, but you're making your own server now at this point, do you ever feel like a burden, like you are encumbered by that 20 years of server history? Like, there are things you can't really do within the plot backdrop of the server because it might mess with what has already been pre-established by the previous writers. Do you struggle with that, or are you guys in a good spot with all that?
This is a really good Jeff question, so I'm going to let him answer it. But the truth is, we have an incredible new liberty to deal with this.
So this is a very interesting question because this we very much do. We very much, at least I personally do feel like it's very important to try to not ruin what people did before. But it is hard because there's been so many different um, cooks in the kitchen when you start looking at stuff. So for instance, there's a good example of this. Our version of Kunark is called Ikasith, and there's a bunch of lore books in the world that talk about the history of Ikasith as a continent and what's going on there. One of the very first books you get as part of like the opening story of the game explains to you that there are no orcs left on Ikasith. They are all pushed off the continent. When Ikasith came out originally as its own basically expansion, there's a huge focus on there being a bunch of orcs on the continent. So you had one group of people, the initial creator of the server basically said, there are no orcs here. 10 years later, when these zones were being made, he was gone. So they definitely, they missed that, right? Like, because it's just sort of like kind of offhandedly mentioned in a book. And, a lot of MMO players don't necessarily do the best job at, reading material like that when it's placed in front of them. So we have to be very cognizant of like trying to figure out what other people have done, like dig through really old, like forum posts or like old notes and trying to figure out like what was the actual purpose here? What were they trying to do? Because so much of this is old and so much of it's just baked into this, the existing server that it's really hard to be careful to keep that intact without breaking anything, especially when not necessarily everyone has done that in the past.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, you almost need like a lore master on the team, right, to help you maintain that verisimilitude as you continue to build off into the future. I mean, I think even EverQuest itself struggles with that, as we're 20 what are we 20, we're 25 years into EverQuest now, and who can really run a story for 25 years without retconning something or going back, right, and messing something up, especially when it's not the same. It's not like one master planner, right? There's no like George Lucas running this thing start to finish. There's no Tolkien here, right? It's many hands in the pot, which is not a bad thing, but it increases that risk of that human error, like you mentioned. So I think it's admirable that you guys are doing that and you're taking the steps to try to respect the original work. But we've brought up now a few times the previous server, right? So can you talk to us about how Dalia came to be, how it evolved from Shards? Like, what happened? Why are we not just still developing new content for Shards of Dalia? Instead, we're making a new server.
So, so more or less what happened, for the long and short, when the original owner left, he left the server in control of one person. That person was around for a few years, and then handed it off to a few others. He still owned the server. He was still paying for. He was going to handle the financials. He left the server in the hands of someone who slowly locked everyone out, kind of disappeared, and just made it impossible for us to continue updating. After talking to the server owner and trying to negotiate, to make this work, it basically came down to this is the only way to really move forward and continue, providing content for people to do and trying to continue the server was to fork it and continue on from that point. Um, and that was just sort of the reality we faced. We just didn't really have another option other than just letting 20 years worth of work fall to the wayside.
Okay, so the old server, is that still going to exist, or will that be gone now?
It will exist, but
It's just frozen in time, right?
yeah, in the same way that a junkyard exists.
Yeah. Okay. And Now you're making this new server. Everyone is starting where there's no like character imports, right? It's a clean start for everyone.
Yes, that was a big discussion we had. I think we had an opportunity to redo a lot of systems, and because of how much change was going to happen to the server, it would be only fair that everyone started again fresh. And I think the original server was basically 50-50 divided on a reset versus maintaining the existing existence. So this really kind of pushed it over the end. And then we were able to do a lot of cool things like push into the RLF2 client. And I was able to avoid a bunch of things like, porting everyone's characters over to the new like database tables. Right now, it's just everybody starts on the brand new database. It kind of makes the work somewhat easier.
Yeah, I mean, hey, at the end of the day, a fresh start has a ton of amazing benefits, right? It's why official EverQuest servers they do TLPs every year now because there's something about a clean start with everyone being at 1, everyone being at 0, right? That attracts people, and there's a lot of people like myself who I've seen the server in the past and I've been like, oh, that looks really cool. But like, I see how long it's existed and I just, I get cold feet about it. Like I want to come in and start on equal footing with everyone around me. And I love that feeling of this whole population kind of burgeoning and moving through the content as this big band, right? So I think the fresh start is going to be awesome for you guys, and I'm super excited to see it. I'm not sure if I'm going to try it. I want to try it, but I also like have other EQ commitments, and I'm like worried that I'll get sucked in.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Oh man, it sounds so cool. Like I want to get in there
I
now.
would say don't try it. You're going to become a fan.
No, I know you guys don't want me there. You don't want my band of henchmen coming over there anyway. But
We need more henchmen.
No. Yeah, please enjoy it. I mean, we also agree. I think there was an internal debate amongst the players and amongst some of the staff members who have probably fallen by the wayside that we shouldn't do this. But the truth is, when, like you said, when there is something with such a long history and you're starting at square one, there's players 20 years ahead of you. How are you ever going to catch up? Versus when I started playing, trade skill gear was the best gear we had. We had to fight dragons with that. And the players are going to get to experience that again, which is an amazing feeling.
Well, on the old server, we had begun experimenting with a system we called the seasons, and it was basically kind of a hybrid approach to like there was code that everyone would start brand new and they would be a seasonal character, and they weren't able to interact with non-seasonal characters. So it was like a segment of the player base that was all starting brand new at a season launch. And a season would go, we experimented with like a 6-month season, a 3-month season. And then at the end of the season, all the characters just became unflagged and became new characters. So it really gave an opportunity for new players to begin with experienced players at the same time. Now, the seasonal functionality is still there, and we plan to use this moving forward. I mean, this launch technically to me feels like a seasonal launch, and you'll probably see one in like a year and a half, so to speak, maybe around that time.
that'll be cool. Yeah. So when you look at the future of doing seasonal launches with this, is that going to be baked into the current server, or will you spin up a second server entirely for it?
I believe it's baked in because I never considered a separate server. Originally, a separate server kind of divides the players. Being on the same server, you can. I think we wait about a month, and then at any point in time, you can willingly leave the season. Most people just enjoy it as a fresh start, so they stay towards the end, and it keeps everyone together. They're all chatting together, and then it's a seamless transition from season right into the standard play.
First and foremost, we're a chat room with elves. So we want everybody to be together. And if they want to opt out of the season, they can always join the regular play.
Right. Yeah. Now I've got a friend. Shout out to Vinter, who's been big on shards. Well, he's been really into it for a long time, and I watched some of his YouTube videos, and it looks like most of the content he's doing is kind of geared around that ish person level. When you're doing the max level raids, is it also that 6 to 12 range that you have for the lower level raids?
So our raids come in. I would say our organized group content comes in three sizes. We've got 6 mans. We've got 18 mans, which are the bulk of our raid content, and we've got 12 mans, which are sort of the in between. I'm really good friends with Tev. I've known Tev forever, but if you want to look at, he's got a bunch of some of our 18-man content videos on his YouTube as well. The higher end fights tend to be more complex than what a lot of people are used to, especially on the lower end of like prog servers, TLPs. But we definitely have some more of the. There's plenty of like the stuff that's more similar to what you expect from a TLP along the way, but our hardest fights tend to be inspired more by modern MMO designs. The fights are more complex. They got more going on. But we have, there's definitely I would say there's a push right now to get more six man content because it tends to be a fan favorite as far as like, I can log in, get my friends, go do something. It's a lot easier to put together 6 people than 12 or 18. So
In many ways, it can be more difficult also because in an 18-man raid, if one person dies, how much did your efficiency go down? In a 6-man raid, if you die, you're in trouble.
Yeah, some of the developers, they almost have like different development personalities where, okay, this time I'm going to make an extremely difficult fight, and that it is geared to be challenging, and it's meant to be completed by the best of the best players, right? And I mean, if the player enjoys, really being challenged, then there's lots of content like that. And then other developers are maybe they're newer as a developer, so they're just trying to learn the scripting language, right? And it really depends on kind of personality type, skill level.
Yeah, I could see that, and I think that's good though because it gives everybody a space, right, to find their niche, and if you're just getting acclimated to that scene, it gives you something to work towards. So I think that sounds awesome. Now, if there are a lot more mechanics and they're finely tuned raids, does that mean they are instanced?
So all of our content currently is not instanced. Previous to this, we did not have a client that could support instancing. Um, or I believe our last client could, but it was never implemented. And when we switched to that client, a lot of the developers who were working on it sort of disappeared. So currently, we do not have any instance content. Our respawn times are relatively, they're a couple days with some randomizer attached to them. In the future, there's most likely we're going to be adding support for instances and adding content. Realistically, adding some content that's aimed at being instanced instead of it being, um, you know, all contested. Right now, we're trying to go wide with content to make sure there's enough stuff for people to do and raid and squabble over. But in the future, we would like at least to add some stuff that's aimed at that. So it's not going to be. I mean, at least this is my opinion, not necessarily representative of everyone, but it'd be something like, okay, this is a 1 week lockout. Maybe the loot's not quite as good, or it doesn't cover quite as much, but you don't ever have to fight for it, right? It's just there. So
I kind of like the balance that you mentioned earlier about how there's this competitive scene, and if you don't want to partake in that, then there is the instancing. So I kind of like that hybrid approach. I wonder how we would get that to work.
I mean, that's generally how I feel about it too, Cole. So that's more or less what I would like to have something like that, right? Where we're providing non-instanced content that maybe is a little harder and a little more rewarding versus instanced content that's, not as rewarding, but it's always there, right? You don't have to worry about fighting over it. You can just go get your stuff.
Yeah.
Having said this, I was always a big fan of the race. I think people like competition too, so
Oh
right
man.
now we're leaving it that way.
Yeah, there are
So
people who race to 6 mans, and like it gets. I mean, what you were describing earlier. I mean, it's cutthroat.
yeah, so my question here, I have a few questions throughout all that. First, how do you keep like? Can't I just roll up with like 50 people and smoke an 18-man boss?
No, you can't.
No.
It's the 18-man limit. So if you aggro 19th man, he won't be able to damage the mob, but he will still be able to be hit by it, and you'll all be killed.
So
Yeah, you
can't
can't
I
get
then
healed.
stand
Yeah.
by a boss that my competition is about to go to and like make it so that half their raid can't do anything, forcing them to wipe, and then when they wipe, I jump on it with my raid?
We have pretty strict rules against stuff like that. We have pretty strict engage rules, more or less. Once you engage something, you've got 30 minutes. Most thing is claimed by zone. So if you show up to plane of air and you start raiding plane of air, we have pretty much like that zone is yours. There are plenty of other zones to go do something else. We try to avoid like the really excessive griefing. We're fine with you racing to mobs or whatever. We're fine with you racing for claim. We don't want you showing up and just being like standing next to someone and trolling them and essentially, just how do I say this? Like, we don't want people being a jerk for the sake of being a jerk. There's definitely been issues with that in the past, and in the early 2000s, a bunch of like or client changes and rules had to be put in place just to sort of deter that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's cool to hear that. Like, let me give you a perspective of kind of like the stuff that modern EQ players are dealing with on TLP. There's a guild on Teak, which is a server that we're most active on right now. A guild of like awful, really terrible players, and we just had like an Avatar of War fight, right? So we have to kill Statue and Idol and sometimes Vindy. So anyway, we bat phone for that, and everyone's forming up. Their guild trains Vindy onto us and then evacs for some reason. Like, it accomplishes nothing, but they're stupid, so they do it. So we kill Vindy. They do the same thing with Statue, and then this is basically they sit there and wait for us to engage Idol. And the moment Idol is going to die, Avatar of War will spawn. So as long as they don't engage Idol and they force us to fight it by like pulling it on top of us, then they think that they have like a leg up in the DPS race, right? Because it's not first to tag for modern EQ anymore. It's whoever does the most damage. But the whole time that we're fighting all of these mobs, they will cast Dispel hundreds, I mean like literally hundreds of times, so that you can't get anything. If I have my whole raid, if we all count down, I say, okay, on the count of three, we're all going to cast Tash, Mallow, any dot, anything you have to try to bury a slow. It will instantly all, like, it just blinks on the screen and everything is gone. So we have to deal with that. I mean, that guild loses every single mob pretty much. They get totally stomped despite all the attempt at griefing they do.
Well, it seems like loser behavior.
It is loser behavior, 100%. But that's just like what a lot of EQ players have become accustomed to dealing with, unfortunately. So it's refreshing to hear that you guys have a strong stance on that. Now, my question here is, what do you like ban right away? Do you have a strikes policy? How do you approach it when you encounter players who are stepping out of line?
So I like to. In the past, it was just like a jail where we use a command and you go to the plane of justice for a duration period of time and you can't chat. And once you've served your sentence, you can leave the plane of justice. So the character's kind of locked there. I like to reach out to the individuals, chat with them. I've done a lot of conversation between rivaling guilds, and you can eventually weed through the tribalism between the two guilds. Like, okay, this
Dude,
is them.
I
Yeah.
you are doing the Lord's work with that, because there is some serious, there are like blood feuds between some guilds I know. You know what I mean?
Oh man,
Um,
there'll be like you can tell when one guild member comes in the chat and is like, "That's like the war cry banner," right? And then all of them come in, right? And then it's like back and forth. And I think the best thing to do is to recognize that they're coming at it from like that sense of camaraderie. Like, okay, guys, you do the bat phone. Well, they're gonna do the bat phone when it comes to a discussion or an argument, and you just gotta I like to listen to both sides, right? Because they're experiencing from a certain perspective, and the other player, and you really gotta. I think the best thing to do is find the middle ground, and then you communicate the middle ground. I think the biggest thing though is that with the lack of updates on the old server, one of that was kind of uh, refining the rules, right? A lot of the rules are out of date, and it communicates. It doesn't really communicate well where we stand on things, and a lot of times, like with not being able to update, if things are broken, it builds contentment. And I think by us being available, making changes, that they kind of build a respect with the player base. And then when we ask them, hey, can you maybe like adhere to this code of conduct, they're more willing to kind of toe the line, so to speak.
Yeah, I
This
think
sounds ridiculous, but I've been asking the people to behave respectfully, and it's going to work.
well, a
It
big thing
works
is
more than
like
you
the bottlenecks that exist drive most of the negative behavior, right? And since you guys have a multitude of quality content that people could do, as long as you don't feel like there's nothing you could do tonight because it's all taken by other guilds, you know what I mean? You're way less likely to see that kind of big drama. And the problems really come out when you have like, eventually you identify little cliques of people that are just going to be like they're there to grief people, like that's what they're enjoying. You identify those people, you get them out, and most people are good at that point.
So I will say this: a lot of times, one of the biggest issues is like gray areas. I would say that's generally where a lot of the fights come from, where there's where something wasn't done, or I should say, where there was some problem, and instead of fixing it through like coding in a solution, a lot of times it is sort of tried to be done. Well, let's just make a rule, right? And then that rule has some loophole in it, and that causes fighting. We've had some issues with some fights where it's like, oh, we put a thing here so you can't just camp on top of the boss and wait for it to spawn because it causes issues. So then people just moved back one room, right? So then instead of camping that room, you camp the room before it. And that caused a bunch of fighting. When the actual solution was probably something like, locking the door when the enemies are dead. So you can't get in and you just can't get into that wing of the zone until the boss is alive. So then you remove that issue, right? So instead of trying to solve things through just saying, hey, don't do that, as many times as we can just, programmatically say, hey, you can't get here unless the fight is alive, or say, hey, this thing that's causing this friction or the tension, we'll just make that not a thing. That solves a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like everyone has to deal with this headache with EverQuest. Like every server has to deal with it, and even the official company has had so many different ways they've tried to tackle it. And before they were, now they're just like hands off, they don't care. But I mean, like there were times back in the day where we had to like random for mob rights, or we had to like duel for mob rights on blue
My
servers, or
goodness.
we had to do like trivia. Like in 2011, there was a lot of Lord of the Rings trivia over Velius bosses. I'll tell you that in EverQuest. So
That's pretty funny.
yeah, it's just there's not an easy solution, but it's like one of those things that I commend you guys for because it takes constant stewardship, I would say.
So I will say this: a lot of times when you look at, we'll look at logs and see what happened, who got there first, whatever's going on. We've definitely had some issues of like people fighting over things in ways that are definitely not kosher. Um, and it basically comes down to like a lot of times rather than, basically the dev will say, the person dealing with them will say, hey, you need to come to some agreement here because you basically both showed up, or we can despawn the mob. We've had a lot of like, mobs get despawned. We've also had people say, hey, we'll just step out, or like, they'll be like, oh, we were here 30 seconds later, right? Or like sometimes people realize, we're kind of being a jerk. So just it's it's one of those things where there's not a perfect solution, and a lot of times the solution is like social and not. Sadly, it's not just you were right, you were wrong. It was, you both clicked up at the same time or whatever. You both entered the room at the same time.
We're big on trying to get along. This server is historically a smaller server. I think max pop back in the day was like 600 concurrent.
I think the most I ever saw was right when Icosith originally launched, and that was like 800 some, and that was for a few hours.
So
So
there you go. But, when I played on Burtox, it was like 2,200, 2,500, and people still knew your name. And if you were a jerk, they remembered that.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a little bit better with a smaller population. Eventually, the population of servers and with one of the negative things that instancing brings to the game here is reputation doesn't matter anymore because if I can go up to a mob and spawn an instance for my collection of 18 people, then my guild can be any size. I could have 10,000 people in my guild and we split off into little teams of 18 and we do our instances. And when your guild is so big that it's entirely self-sufficient, you don't need to group, you don't need to port or even sell outside of the guild, then your guild members can behave in any way they want. And it just has the server has no way to respond outside of GM, GM stepping in and handling stuff. So that is one of the negative impacts of instanced content is just like the guilds can balloon in size and there's nothing to stop them really. But I don't want to, we're belaboring the rate thing here. I'm sure most of the viewers will never encounter those kind of negative experiences. I just come from kind of that background.
That's good feedback, though. I like that.
Yeah, so like
we're
when
lucky
you
to
guys
be
add
very
those
integrated,
things,
I
you'll
guess.
see add things slowly and watch how the player base evolves, because players always are finding weird, unintended ways to use the smallest change, right?
We have found people doing the most random, unexpected things to get around stuff, or break things. I mean, Cole, tell the thing about people rooting orcs in Eastern Wastes. That whole story is still wild to me.
So basically, when you rooted them, they would basically pull and so like there's a named in a camp, and then there's all the ads that doesn't drop the valuable item. They'd pull one of the ads far away, root the that NPC and camp out, and then once they camped out, the root would like for some reason when they camped out, it would reset the aggro, and so that mob's uh, that became its temporary return to spawn point. And they would basically slowly pull all the orcs around until just the named was in the camp. And so all the ads that were supposed to be the trash to clear to the named were just somewhere out in Eastern Wastes, just stuck in an area. And then they would just farm the named. And then I had to like write code to like determine if this mob was being rooted and the player was camping out. I mean, it's part of that's fun. It's like a security aspect of it. But
Yeah, I love seeing players come up with that creative gameplay. I don't envy you guys having to be in that position of not only just like fixing it, but I think sometimes you make the call to not fix it. You're like, well, that's pretty clever. You know what I mean? If it's not too
yeah,
game breaking,
Oh, if it's awesome, you got to leave it.
right?
So the interesting thing about that one is the mob in question that the camp they were like doing this to was a relatively low value camp. They weren't doing something that was like super valuable, right? It was, they were basically farming themselves, like making it easier to farm a couple hundred platinum an hour in a game where farming a few thousand platinum an hour is pretty easy. So
well,
it was just kind of weird.
another player ratted them out, right? So a lot of times, so we do this thing where you get rewarded with like fame if you kind of help find bugs. So the player's like, hey, just so you know, this is happening. And even at the start of this server, someone let us know another, like they were able to, I had added code where buffs. So basically, like if you're an enchanter, we added something that lets you what's it? I can't remember what it's called, but you cast it on yourself, and for the duration of 10 minutes, your charm pet will not break, so that you can go and go to the bathroom, whatever. And what it's doing is it's freezing that buff. Well, I had made a mistake where it was actually freezing all buffs. So, and then it wouldn't break when the pet engaged. So this user was like engaging. They're putting high level heal over times in the pet and engaging raid bosses, and
Oh
it was
man, that's
just
wild.
I know. And so they did a complex video, showing how to recreate the bug. And so you just go through and fix it, right? Well, that's the players letting you know this stuff. And so they're pretty like they like fair play also. So when they find things, that's the good thing about the competitive aspect. They'll if someone else is breaking the game, they don't want them to have the edge up, so they'll kind of like spoil the cheats basically.
Yeah, nowadays everyone is so quick to put things like on the internet. Like you can't have any secrets almost because everyone wants to put it on Twitch or on YouTube. And like obviously, like I'm one of those people who like I find a big exploit and I'm like, okay, well we're gonna use it. I put it in my back pocket. We use it once and then we blow it up so everyone knows about it and no one can ever use it again.
That's cool.
But back in the old days, people used to just keep those things. Like your guild would know like some crazy exploit and no one would know about it because it was all open world and no other guild was ever going to get, past R because you would crush them. You know what I mean? So you were the only guild that knew that you could like mage cheese all the NTOV dragons when they were rooted. that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
there is some reward in being like number one guild, right? So that's
Yeah.
kind of why we're hesitant to add instancing. I think even Jeff said if we were going to add it, it'd be we'd like a couple situational things to try it out. We would probably do something custom with it and make it interesting. I think we do use it for a player's personal house. Like you can go and it's your own instance. I've never used it, but I think currently it's broken. I have to fix it, but
There
Well,
is
instanced.
some semi-instance content in that we have these treasure maps. And forgive me if we spoke about it already, but yeah, we have drops that you can get called the treasure map. And when you open the treasure map, it tells you what zone you need to go to. When you arrive there, it tells you what coordinates you need to go to. And when you get to the coordinate, you can use a shovel and you dig there. And it produces monsters and you fight them. And it can turn even into a raid encounter where you will receive treasure. So those are sort of quasi-instanced drop-based encounters that are designed for players who are out of stuff to do.
I think that's really cool. I would say that instance stuff can be amazingly competitive. There is an aspect of like this the speed run part of it when no one can interfere with you. You know what I mean? As long as it's not just like you zone into the raid and it's all instance and all you do is like press one, enter the raid, and then you run through the raid, right? There has to be like some kind of progression piece. Um, on Mischief, we had a launch Prophecy of Roe. No, the Buried Sea. The Buried Sea is totally instance, right? To get to the final raid zone, you have to do 9 missions as a group, and that flags your whole group for the final raid zone. So we spent weeks practicing to make sure that we could do those missions as quickly as possible with our guild. And we were racing another guild, and the first encounter in the raid zone when you get there is a DPS race. Like if you don't defeat it within a certain number of minutes, I think it's 5 minutes actually. If you don't win within 5 minutes, you lose. Like the mobs become super powered and just crush you. And the question becomes, what is the lowest possible number of people we could attempt this event with and still possibly win? And the conventional wisdom was like, you don't do it with like less than 30 people. But it takes a long time to get 30 people through all those quests, right? So we spent a ton of time just like doing the math to make sure what was technically possible with an optimal burn. And like both guilds are like spying on each other, and we both go in with 18 people. We concluded that 18 was as close as you can cut it, and we got it. We went full burn and we got it with 18, and the other guild went full burn and they wiped. And they blew the whole race, because to do that 18-man burn, you have to burn like things that have 6-hour cooldowns. So
Rough.
that was it was an incredible race, and we got to see like, no matter what limitations you put on players, they're going to find some creative, incredibly creative ways to be competitive about it.
That is cool to see the extreme optimization. We've experienced it in the history of our server as well. Jeff probably could talk more about it, but we had certain items and players would hoard certain things and become extremely powerful as a result. And we tried to sort of smooth the curve slightly.
I mean, so in regard to this, I think I'd rather talk about Hate's Fury because so on live, there's a zone called Hate's Fury. We have the same name for it, but it was basically used as like a quest zone. So it's instance in that only one group can be in it at a time. And it's a timed thing. You have an hour to do the entire thing for this quest. We had a long time on the old server, we had a leaderboard for who could do it the fastest. So there were literally groups that would be like, okay, let's see if we can beat this time, right?
Yep.
So when that first came out, like I was in the first group to clear it, and we were like trading off with another group. We spent maybe like, I would say probably like 15 hours before we finally killed it, because the timer was an hour. We'd get in there, spend some time, wipe, have to come back, then wait for the other group to take their turn. But it was this like back and forth race thing. And then later on, as people got more gear and they got used to it, became, oh, can we clear this in 20 minutes? Can we clear it in 15 minutes? And just like watching people race to fight over that was like super fun.
I think that's super cool. And the best part about it is like people compete to a really high degree in that scenario, and they don't develop any vendettas. Because it's like totally different when someone is like fighting you over a mob and only one person can kill it at the end of the day, versus like a race to see who's faster.
So I spent a lot of time in the high-end WoW private server community years ago, and watching that slowly develop, and from like this just ragtag a bunch of people who don't really understand what's going on to where it ended up at the end, where it was all just like, how do we kill this content 30 seconds faster than that guy?
Right.
It's both interesting and horrifying at the same time, because you watch the game that is one thing very quickly become something else, but you also just see like what everyone can eke out by just, how do I get that last half percent? How do I get that last quarter percent so I can beat them by 10 seconds?
I do
So that
like a
brings
good
up
race.
my next series of questions, right? When you're in that hyper focused environment, class balance becomes so critical, because like no one wants to be the magician when you could have the wizard, right? So how do you guys manage your class balance?
Hours and hours and hours of Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah.
So I'll say this. So generally, there's two things going on. One thing to note about our class balance, and this is something to talk about in the high end. Most of our fights are not balanced to be so difficult that you're going to need a perfect raid to kill them. A lot of time, just having having enough people who know the fights and can push the buttons, can follow directions, in most cases will get you there. And thing two is you are rewarded for having a diverse raid group, because you have a chance to get bonus loot for every unique class you have past 11. So if you have 14 or 15 people in the raid, you have, I don't remember, a 40 or 50% chance to get an extra item off a boss. I don't
Oh,
remember.
that's pretty cool. That's a really great system.
So generally speaking, most raids are going to be, you're going to be shooting to get 13, 14 classes in it. And we also try to make it so that there's like, with the launch of the server, we're trying to fix a lot of the balance issues that had crept up over the years, just between, power creep and things like just some of the way things had been designed at the high end, sort of breaking apart. But generally speaking, want wizards and rogues to be the highest DPS, because they don't really offer anything other than that. And then you've got your classes like ranger and monk and magician, who offer some utility but not a ton. And then you start getting down lower to the classes like, uh, Beast Lord and Necromancer, and then down to Enchanter and Bard, where like they offer a bunch of utility, so they don't do as much damage. But generally speaking, most classes have slightly different damage profiles and slightly different like cooldown abilities. So like a Necro, for instance, while on a single target fight isn't going to be as good as a wizard, if you give 3 spread out targets that the wizard can't group up in AOE, the Necro can dot them all. So it's not quite 1-to-1, but generally in a single target scenario, the goal is for wizards and rogues to be sitting at the top, and then everyone else to be just sort of grouped based on their utility.
Yeah, and kind of along a couple of these conversational points, with the seasons, we end up having seasonal leaderboards, like first hardcore of this class to get level 65. And that's every class. First non-hardcore to get to this class, to this level 65. Hardcore being if you die, you're permanently dead. And then they've got like trade skill leaderboards. So at the beginning of a seasonal launch, you have both new players and competitive players playing through the game at a high rate of like just intensity. And then at that point, what we end up doing is we discover a lot of class balance at every point through the game. Like, hey, just we didn't, something will get added to the game as a fixed late game, and then during a seasonal launch, it ends up becoming really overpowered for brand new characters. And so the curve really begins from like level 1 all the way to the end of the game, where we're kind of making the experience feel enjoyable for this class from beginning of the game all the way to the end. So it really is kind of like I don't know, it's like if you're gonna do class balance, it's it's like doing the dishes but not wiping the counters down, right? You have to do every aspect of it.
Yeah. No, I mean that's actually really cool, and something I didn't think about, that you encourage people to play hard on a fresh kind of setting, and you get to see all the little things that need to get fixed because of that environment. I like that.
I
Now,
don't want to belabor this, but Cole mentioned hardcore. We do have an option to flag your character where you permanently die if you're killed.
I like that.
It's so cool.
I'm a big enjoyer of hardcore and solo self-found EverQuest. So, do
I'll
you
say
get any reward if you make it to 65 on those permadeath characters?
We will
so.
announce your name when you die.
You
You
also
level
get
faster.
Okay.
It is, which is both a blessing and a curse. The leveling faster is one of the most interesting things about it because you will level a lot faster, which means you don't get as much plat or as much gear because you're leveling faster, so you don't kill as much stuff.
Yeah.
So it becomes this really interesting balancing act of, oh, I'm so much over leveled, but do I actually want to go take advantage of that, or do I want to go try to farm some money and some gear so I can afford my spells and I don't get murdered? Like, it's very interesting. Like, sometimes that leveling faster can actually cause you problems.
Yeah, I could see it. Skills, spells, and gear, all big factors that start to go by the wayside when you level too quickly.
I could see hardcore being. You asked like, what is the reward for it? And it's a cool system, but really, it's only ultimately in its infancy, right? It hasn't been fleshed out. Like we could, as a dev team, like this is really kind of how our team works. Someone brings up a point like, hey, what is the reward for playing hardcore? And we're like, well, really not much. And then we might start to brainstorm like, what can we add to the game to create incentive that players want to do this? Like maybe we add, like visual effects that you can add to your characters that maybe it can be account bound and you can trade it between characters, or maybe you're on a leaderboard, right? So that's kind of really how a lot of these ideas start on the server.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the idea that victory is its own reward. But with that said, if leveling to 65 without dying gave me like an account based color aura that my character could have walking around, baby, I would be all over that quickly.
Yep.
That'd be the coolest thing ever. Or like on live now on retail EQ, on your character's birthday, 1 year after they're created and all subsequent years, your nameplate glows like different colors. It goes through like a whole spectrum of colors.
We just did some back end changes where I think we'll be able to add prefixes and suffixes now. So one of the things maybe we could reward is kind of like a title for, like if you leveled a druid to 65 in hardcore, then your account unlocked this usable prefix or suffix.
I think that's a big one that pretty much everyone unanimously would be cool with, and it would be fun. But the visual thing would be 10 times cooler.
Like to see the player profile where like there was raid gear on this character that died and you're dead now.
Something very interesting we learned during the seasons about hardcore characters is there is actually quite a lot of value in leveling hardcore characters first, because even though you're limited on gear and skills, there were some people who what they did is they took groups that could function on pretty low gear, so groups that were like focused around kiting, and they'd level those characters up because they leveled so much faster, which made it so what they would there were also rewards for it during the season, but you could level your characters up really quickly and then use those to farm resources for your non-hardcore characters. So you can't do a ton, right? Like you can't go farm the hardest stuff, but you still make a lot more money killing, level, 50 like grays or whatever than you do leveling up naturally. So you can
I totally get it. And I was thinking about that. Like if you could trade that gear down, definitely.
Like, the fun part is the balance is if you die, well, it's all over.
Oh, yeah, that group's healer, during the first season, the hardcore group's healer died, and they basically had to start over because they just didn't have a healer. So they had to like go level up another healer to finish.
Man, I should get that bind wound skill up.
Yeah, right. Did they go AFK?
No, they were kiting pumas in the plague lands, which
the ignominious puma death.
And something happened, and they got on the druid and killed the druid, and they were like level 62. They were maybe like a couple hours from 65, and then they died. So it was just like I just remember all the horrors of it, and they were just so upset. But it helped them a ton. Like the thing is, when you first hit 65 or even like those high 60s, the stuff you're getting doesn't last super long. Like you're not getting stuff that's going to stick with your character for the most part. A lot of they're getting, a couple hours of farming on a high-end character, maybe. But it does just make leveling so much smoother, right? If you go from being able, I have to pick and choose my spells every time I get new ones and be really choosy, to, well, I can just basically afford everything I want. That's a very different feel. So yeah. It was not something I anticipated during the season, and it was very divergent, but it was actually kind of cool.
I think that is cool. Yeah.
Doesn't break anything in the long run, but make them feel smart and powerful, and that's just actually fun.
Yeah, I think it's important to do your best to not get in the way of fun. So many times, even especially in retail EQ, there's so much focus on wanting the players to play it the way that it was intended to be played that we get in the way of fun. And this is something that you see with D&D. If you've ever DM'd a D&D campaign,
Oh, of course.
like I'm big with like the rule of cool. Like, you know what? Go for it. It's not what I was expecting, but I love it. So, yeah, I think
I'm the self-titled head of the fun department. We have another dev named Crinkles who really likes whimsy and fun. And if there's anything that we ever have in the dev dynamic where I could favor fun over the rules, I'm trying to get fun in.
oh yeah, and that's definitely the way to do it. People are no one's gonna remember the rules in 20 years. They're gonna remember the fun. So going back to the class situation, I come in day one, right, with the server, and I roll a warrior. How familiar is it to me, or is it different? Like, am I auto attack and press 1 to kick, and that's like 1 through 50 for the warrior class, or is it a lot different?
So for warriors in particular, you get some disciplines. Our discipline system is more active. You basically get some like they're not. It's not super active in the case of a warrior. You get some buttons that have 30 to 60-second cooldowns on most of them. They adjust based on your weapon speed. Um, and then you get that. I mean, that's basically, I'd say, the biggest difference for a warrior. It's going to feel very similar. You get a couple extra buttons to press, more or less. You get an upgrade to kick that's got basically makes your next kick bigger. You've got driving strike, which lets you do a melee round on something. You get bloodthirst, which gives you a small amount of your physical damage life stolen as becomes life stealing, and you generate some extra threat. You get a 3-target whirlwind, some stuff that reduces the damage you take. But like I said, it's going to feel pretty similar. You got some extra buttons, but
Our warriors are really strong. All of the tanks, really. They're close, but not the same.
I would say one of the biggest differences that a lot of people coming from the traditional EQ um, servers have to fight over a little bit is just that our class balance is a lot closer than EQ. So like warriors are better tanks as far as like damage goes. They take less damage than the other tanks do. They don't have as good as threat, but the gap isn't so big that you have to tank on a warrior. Often you'll tank on something else just because of the context of the fight. If threat really matters, you're generally going to want to tank on a Shadow Knight.
I love that because let me tell you, as an EQ player, I am so sick of the meta of like when it comes to raids, like it's warrior or bust. It's so boring and it's so lame because like paladins and shadow knights are so cool, such flavorful classes. It was always sad that they never got that star power. You know what I mean? To tank with
Yeah,
the big
that
dogs.
reliance on the warrior defensive thing and then switching in defensive warriors. We tried to get away from that where you could equally use in general, we're big on substitution. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to work.
If I could delete 2 things from EQ, complete heal and defensive would be the 2 things I pop out.
So funnily enough, we have complete heal. It doesn't work like standard EQ. Our complete heal is just a full heal and a cooldown. So it's not chaining full heals. They're basically like fast cast. You need to save a tank. You hit
It's
your
not
CH.
generally used.
Yeah, you generally will mem one of them. You'll keep one of them on your spell bar just as like a just in case situation. But most of the time, like you're spamming a big heal, ducking it. Our heals are tuned in such a way that you get a couple healers healing the tank, you'll keep them alive. If you have 2 tanks, you're probably going to need, maybe depending on what's going on, a lot of our fights are designed around you having 2 tanks doing different things. So you have maybe you got your warrior tank and the boss, and then some ads will spawn, or you have to kite something around or whatever on a tank. Like there's enough going on, and we try to make sure that we don't want every raid to be okay. You need 2 warriors, you need 3 wizards, you need 3 rogues. We try to make sure that most comps can kill most things, unless you're trying to do, I would say, like, if you're trying to do stuff in a situation like now where we're going into a fresh wipe and you're trying to push as fast as you can, you have to sort of balance, like, okay, do we want to have a 50% chance to get an extra item or whatever the amount is, or would we rather make every fight a little easier by perfectly stacking our raid?
Right? Would we rather have 4 mages?
We do have a 3-class limit. That is one thing to note in our raids. That is something that throws people for a loop. So you can't have
Oh,
more than 3 of any one class. Um,
interesting.
so generally speaking, in the time I have been on the server, the only class you've ever actually wanted 3 of at any given time was cleric, and for a very short period of time, wizard. And that's because wizard was kind of busted in a very specific way, where we had added we basically changed the skill channeling on gear to increase a wizard's critical strike chance. And some of our wizard A's give them chances to do like um, basically increases their critical strike multiplier a certain percent of the time. So by giving them a bunch of extra crit, it actually just made them scale like insanely. But that was for a very short period of time. And outside of that, it's mostly just clerics. And it's interesting because while clerics are the best healer, there's very few fights that are actually tuned in such a way where you really need 3 clerics. You can get by with 1 or 2 in a lot of them.
It's just 20. It's like 25 years of habit and something ingrained into the EverQuest psyche. You know what I mean? To stack clerics.
It's also just that like with a cleric there's a little more room for error. It's not like you have to have a cleric to do a lot of these fights, but it just means your person can play a little worse. They can make errors and you can recover from them. Whereas if the healer was a druid in that case, they might not be able to recover. Or like if you have a shaman in that case, like you get in the situation where like let's say the cleric in the third group dies, right? A shaman can't be moved into that group and cover the group healing responsibilities for that group. You can move a druid in there, you can move another cleric in there, but that does sort of limit like what you want. Whereas a shaman is way more focused on like I can heal the tank forever. So if you need someone to just if your tank's just getting destroyed by something, you really want a shaman. It's like it's this very weird thing where just because something is theoretically the best, even though like the fight isn't necessarily hard enough to need it, and a lot of the time like having that cleric can actually I'm not gonna say it's a detriment because it's not, but you can speed up things like your trash clear by having a druid or shaman in that scenario who does more damage than a cleric. You could do things like make sure you mobs get debuffed on every trash mob, which will speed up your trash clear. But instead, everyone's like, oh, let's just bring 3 clerics because when things are at their hardest, we have the largest margin for error.
Also with class balance, if a lot of times if players identify like, okay, this is the best, go with this. For instance, just an example, the human race used to get a 5% experience bonus. And when you're running like seasonal races where players are getting, it's every experience point matters, that becomes like okay, you just got to roll this. And so anytime there's a decision in the game, whether it be items, whether it be mob targets, class choice, if the player has to do that, then we don't want to, like, they will eventually bring it to our attention like, hey, this is the 10th time we play through the game, and having to do this every time, I don't like being forced to choose. And they'll tell us to say, like, I don't want to keep doing this, but I do it because it's the best way to play the game, and it's not enjoyable. And we end up looking at it, and then we make some changes. So there really is, it's more back on the player to choose what they want to play, not what they have to play.
It is obscene in a game like this where you could play a troll, an ogre, a dark elf, whatever, to pick human for some advantage. Like, let me be a human fighter, the D&D meme,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's good that people can play what they want once they can free themselves from thinking about it in that min-max way. And I think the 3 limit is actually pretty cool and probably a really good, healthy thing for the server.
It is interesting as far as the 3 limit goes because I would say that it's probably in most scenarios if you're trying to really min max out. I don't think it's really ever correct to bring 3 of something just because bonus loot and getting extra loot is really powerful. But if something is incredibly hard, right, and you're not really worried about loot, you're just like, I want to kill this for the first time. That is where it would actually come up, where you're just sort of like, oh, if I could bring 4 of this class, I would.
Yeah, I can see that. So the
well,
okay,
I'm in a family function, so, and I just want to give some time here, but I also don't want to. I probably should get back to my family. My wife's like, "Hey, how long is it going to take?" kind of thing. So I just kind of wanted, just say thanks for the opportunity to chat with you. And is it cool if I just cut now, or?
Yeah, it's fine, Cole. Yeah, well, I mean, we're gonna enter our wrap up here soon anyway. But having you on here has been awesome. So I'm glad that you were able to make it, and I appreciate you taking the time to jump in, even though you're busy with some other stuff.
Yeah, it was fun meeting you.
Yeah, you as well.
All right. See you guys later.
See you, Cole.
Later, cool.
All right, so my next question here would be leveling 1 to 65. What is the intended timeline for that? Like if I'm not super hardcore, but I'm not totally casual, right? I'm that middle of the pack player. When am I gonna hit 65?
80-ish hours, maybe 90 hours. It depends when you're playing, B, if you're if you're just trying to duo versus group, like the during the seasons are super hardcore groups that are trying really hard. We're hitting max level in about 4 days, not
Yeah, I
like
was gonna
4 real
say
days,
five
not four.
5 days of just like ripping it.
I was like in the third group to hit max level in the first season, and I think my play time was about 60 hours after 4 days, maybe a little less, maybe 55 hours. So now that's in a group that's not our group. Comp wasn't great, but we had a preformed group where people were dedicated to playing, etc., etc. If you try really hard, it's probably 40 hours. If you're on the casual side, I'd say 80 is probably a pretty good guess.
Okay. So what is your hardcore like tip of the spear? Are those guys like on launch? How many people on launch do you expect to play for 48 hours straight?
Oh, quite a
Well,
few.
so
We've been
40
discussing
hours.
faking our own death.
I mean, I would expect. So my current expectation, and I have no idea if this is off base, is that we're probably going to have 500 to 600 characters logged in at launch. That might be way too high. I might be overestimating. I don't know. People two boxing. That's going to be let's say between 250 and 300 players. Um, but it might be more than that. Honestly, there's 800 people in our Discord now, so we don't really know what to expect. Um,
We
but
did have 66,000 users, individual users back in the day. We tried to reach out to most of them. We're hoping some people will come back at least. The product has sort of been waning in the time that we couldn't maintain it. So we're hoping we can get everyone excited again.
I'm sure you will. I think it's going to be big. These launches are super fun. The emulator scene is more crowded and more vibrant though than it's ever been. So it's awesome to see so many great servers like this coming out. Now, can you tell us really quick? I mentioned in the beginning that this is very soon. Just how soon is the server launching?
So we are launching this Friday, September 27th at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. I'm not going to try to convert to GMT off the top of my head, but
Yeah. So if you the people who are listening here, it's going to be like 24 to 40 hours from the time you're hearing this podcast, or it'll already be released if you're listening to it over the weekend. So that's awesome. I love when I hear about something like right before it comes out, so you don't have to spend weeks waiting. You guys have a Discord channel, and I'll put the link in that for that in the description so people jump in. Do you guys have a website as well?
we do. It is Dalia.org. It is currently under construction. It was sort of on the back burner. It was kind of a sprint. So like we have a website, but it's mostly just for if you want to use our standalone account creation tools rather than using EQ emus.
Right.
And then there's some forum links there and some account recovery stuff there from us, but that's due for a full rebuild after a launch settles down.
The good
Well,
news is you don't need much. We have a link to our patcher. You can download the ROF2 client, or maybe you have it already. And with these two things combined, you're good to go. We have Linux support, Windows. I'm not sure about Mac, but it runs good. I've tested it.
awesome. Well, at the end of the day, a website is like overrated at this point. So many people have just moved fully onto Discord, and Discord provides so much great functionality for free that the website really ought to be an afterthought, in my opinion.
I mostly agree, which is why I've been focusing on the Discord. We're mostly trying to use the website to like make it be like a central location for like patch notes and things like that. So both as a reference for anyone else looking back from the future, because as someone who's had to dig through a bunch of really old patch notes in the last 5 months, it's a lot better to have that documented somewhere than it just being in Discord that might disappear or whatever. So
Right. All right. Well, gentlemen, as we come closer to our close here, do you guys have anything else you want to shout out or say before we wrap?
Play Shards of Dalia September 27th, 6 p.m. It's going to be
just
awesome.
just a live walk.
Sorry, Dalaya.
Yeah, just
It
the
is.
fresh server. Be there. It's going to be fun. Here's to 20 more years. How about that? Before we wrap this all up, of course, I want to give a quick shout out to our newest patrons. So big shout out to Greg, Ian, Michael, Brian, Big TBK. Welcome back. And Ryan. Thank you all so much for supporting the podcast. Everybody, this is Jeff, Cole, and Fuwak from the Dalia server, Dalaya server. It's going to be killer. I hope to see you guys there, crushing these low-level raid mobs in that first night. And hopefully a few nights later, you'll be 65 doing big things. This is Zaide, out. Thanks, everybody.